Hello, coaches. Welcome back to the series on the ICF Core Competencies, the 2025 updates to the Core Competencies. I'm excited to be in video number 2 in the series, which is Embodies a Coaching Mindset. And I have Rekha Hatkanagalekar. She'll correct my pronunciation and make that perfect. She's an MCC, and she's with us to describe this core competency and the changes that were made to it. Thank you so much for being here, Rekha.
Thank you, Brighton. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. And you got my name almost right over there.
Okay, thank you so much.
It's not an easy name to pronounce, and you got it pretty well.
Tell us your pronunciation. What is the proper pronunciation?
Okay, so my name is Rekha Hatkanagalekar.
Okay, thank you so much. So if you can start out the video with a overview of this core competency, just a brief overview of the competency before we get into what has changed.
So I'm excited about talking about this competency, Brighton, because this is a very competency which is very close to my heart. And when we look at what it is titled as, right, when we say it embodies a coaching mindset, it's about basically setting up an example, right? So this is who I am embodied as a coach. So that's my mindset. And if we look at who I am is how I coach, essentially, if we look at that, then this competency is all about the being of the coach and how it manifests in a coaching session, right? And how do I show up as a coach fundamentally, with all my biases and all my filters and all my thoughts and my whole self in my context and within my systems and within my culture, while I am being open and curious and flexible with my clients who are showing up in their context and their systems and with their biases and their filters. And when there is an interaction between a coach in their context and a client in their context, things are going to happen, right? So how do I then manage my biases? How do I become aware? And how do I manage my emotions, my thoughts, which are influencing the other in service of the client? So essentially, that's what this competency is all about in a nutshell. And
very good. I love it. I love how you describe that. I haven't heard it described that way, and it was very clear to me. So let's talk about what's changed. So this is probably one of the core competencies that has had the most changes. So if you could go through each of the sub-competencies and how they have changed.
So if you see, right, the change is right at the beginning. So it's the definition itself which has changed. And what is being explicitly called out over here, which was earlier included as part of sub-competencies in a subtler way, is the need for ongoing development and ongoing growth of a coach. Both their personal and professional growth as a coach. So that is being called out in the definition itself. And that it's needed that the coach works with either a supervisor or a coach supervisor or a mentor on an ongoing basis, whichever is needed. And the assumption is that if they do work on themselves and they do work on who they are as people, that is what will show up in how they are coaching and how they are being with their clients. And what that includes then is not only about working on self, but being aware of the best practices in coaching. So it's not just about my skills and my competencies as a coach, but I need to have even peripheral knowledge now. I need to have at least peripheral knowledge awareness that what are the best practices that are evolving, what are the current best practices. We are in the world of AI now. I mean, there is no escaping from AI, right? It's everywhere, whether we like it or not. So how comfortable are we with technology? How comfortable are we with using of technology? And how are we growing in that direction? So all that is something very new, which was not there earlier in the earlier version of this competency. Another thing that has come up, which is very beautiful and useful, is how the biases of the coach are being addressed. So are you aware, as a coach, are you aware of your biases, of your filters, and how they show up in a session or how they show up in conversations, whether it's in a coaching session with the client or with the stakeholders or throughout the coaching engagement? How do they show up and how do they influence the other, the biases? How do the thoughts and the emotions of a coach, how do they influence the other in an interaction? So are you aware of that? So the need to be aware has been introduced as a subcompetency now, which was not there earlier. There's a lot of focus now on, it's like a subtle shift, but it's a significant shift according to me, where we are talking about managing emotions versus regulating emotions, which is what it was earlier. So how do you show up, no matter what your emotions are? How do you effectively show up in a coaching session? That's about managing emotions. There's a large call out on managing well-being now, which was it was there in the earlier definition and the subcompetencies, but it's way more pronounced now. So the need to be maintaining your emotional, your physical, your mental well-being before a coaching session, during a coaching session or a conversation, and after. For me, that is the significant bit. The bit about how do you maintain your emotional, physical, and mental well-being after a session, right? And that is where I think the introduction of need for coaching, supervision, and mentoring fits in very beautifully in a way. So you need somewhere where you can go and process the emotions that come up in a session, because human beings, we are not AI bots, right? So there is an influence, there is an impact of what is happening between you and your client in a session or in any other interaction outside the session. And how does that leave you? What happens when your biases are in the way? What happens when there are filters which are in the way? What happens when there are emotions? All kinds of emotions that come up for you. How do you process those? And how do you cleanly leave a session so that you can enter the next session without any baggage from the past? That I think is extremely important as an add-on, the after bit of maintaining an emotional and mental and physical well-being. Yeah, so I think these are the significant changes that have been added. So there are some new subcompetencies that have been added, especially related to being aware of how your thoughts and your behaviors are influencing the other, whether it's your client or your stakeholder. How your biases, are you aware of your biases in the moment?
So I'm not sure if I heard 2.9, which is about openness. So could you talk a little bit about 2.9?
So it's about nurturing openness and curiosity. Now, earlier version of this which was embedded in the other subcompetencies, was about openness and curiosity without any specific focus on what are you open and curious about. Now, this subcompetency makes it kind of complete, where you're talking about being open and being curious to self. So, am I being curious and open about myself? Knowing myself, knowing what is happening to me in the session, right? Becoming aware. How open and curious I am about my client, about their systemic presence, about their environment, their culture, and in a very neutral way, not in a judgmental way, not in a biased way. And how open and curious I am about the coaching process itself. And I feel that is very beautiful, because if I am curious and I'm open about the coaching process, that's going to lead me to being creative. That's going to lead me to being innovative, and experimental, and looking at what more can be done in the coaching process in the service of the client.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love those, how you described each and every one of those. So let's go back, apart from the changes, or maybe integrating the changes. What does this look like in everyday coaching?
That's a little tricky one, because now we are talking about who the coach is being, right? And then we're not necessarily focusing on specific behaviors. So what are the nuances that might show up? So how curious I am about knowing about my client and their background and their environment and their systemic factors, right? Without taking cognizance of the fact that my client is not operating in a vacuum. My client is operating in a certain context, in a certain environment. So coming into a session with curiosity and not having your own biases show up, whether it's in tone or in the kind of questions that you're asking or the kind of observations you're making. How are you being judgmental about your client and their biases, their filters, and their environment, their culture? I think that because what happens, Brighton, is that this will directly impact other competencies. These are all linked, right? All these competencies are interlinked. So the moment I am coming from my biases, the moment I'm coming from my filters, my judgment, it's going to have an impact on competency 4, which is trust and safety. My client is not going to feel safe because. So, am I being that? Or how am I managing my emotions? Am I being overly enthusiastic, or unreasonably, inappropriately enthusiastic, not really mirroring my client? So I'm not taking cognizance of where is my client and what am I expressing. So obviously, I'm coming from my own experiences from my own past. Or the way I offer my observations or my intuitions and my thoughts, which is so linked to core competency 7, which is evokes awareness, and how that is impacting my client. How are they receiving it? That's where it shows up.
So I'm going to ask this question just a little bit differently. And you can put on your mentor hat, your coach supervisor hat here, and tell us what you see when a coach is doing this really well. And then I'm going to ask you the flip side of that, which is what you see when a coach isn't doing this so well. So let's start out with what how you're seeing this as a supervisor or a mentor.
Yeah, so I'll first address it as a mentor, and I'm happy that you asked me to address it as a coach supervisor also, because there is some amount of difference over there. So when I'm looking at how the coach is having a conversation with the client, right? I'm looking at the demeanor of the coach. So if let's say it's a visual and I have access to the visual, I'm looking at the coach has just shared an observation. The coach has, first of all, has the coach asked permission to share an observation? Is there a partnering happening over there for the coach to share their intuition and their observation with the client? How have they shared it? Have they shared it like, okay, this is the truth? So if you're at a level of mastery, you would be presenting it very neutrally. So this is how I look at it. And now it's up to you, because it's your life. And so you need to examine what I have put on the table with your filters, and then you have to see if it fits in with you or not. And if it doesn't, I'm perfectly okay with it. Right? So that is how. So I give it, and I'm willing to receive it in a very neutral manner. So there is no too much of expression of emotion one way or the other. So that is one. Second thing is how much, like I said earlier, right? How much am I asking my client? How much curiosity am I demonstrating in the session to know about the client, so that the client becomes aware of where they are coming from, what is their context, and how that might be influencing how they think, how they behave, and what the results are that they're getting, so that it helps them to make changes, right? So how curious am I? How open am I? How flexible am I to receive feedback? How flexible am I to give feedback? So these are some of the things that will show up significantly if a coach is at a mastery level or at a higher level of competence, I would say, right?
Okay. So then let's look at this from the flip side, which is when a coach is maybe first starting out in school. What are some of the mistakes that you see? What are some of the areas when a coach has not mastered this competency? What's typical?
Okay, so one of the things is inappropriate expression of emotion. Okay. So not taking cognizance of where my client is standing and coming from my experience from my past and expressing my emotion of joy or disagreement in a way which is biased. So that is not where the client is standing. I'm standing in a different place, my client is standing in a different place, and I'm not aware of me standing in a different place from where my client is. So that is one. Another thing is to be offering my observation in a way as if it is conclusive, like it's the truth. Yeah. It's like coming from, okay, I have been there, I have done that, so I know better. And so, this is what I'm, not just that this is what I'm seeing, but this is how it should be. So making that offer in a way which sounds like this is how it is and there cannot be any other perspective. So not sharing it like this is a perspective, it's a valid perspective, but it's not the only perspective. And because that is how it is being shared, when the client is not, if the client does not accept it, then there are emotions that are coming up over there, and those are getting shown on the face or in the voice or in the tone or in the next question. And sometimes it's also like, you're trying to convince the client and saying the same thing in different ways, that, okay, can you not see? This is how it is, right? And then then that's it. Then there is a spin. And then before you know it, the coach is lost somewhere and very difficult to come out of that. So that is where we are talking about maintaining that uh, managing your emotions in the moment, right? Becoming aware of your biases. Are you aware that what you're speaking or what you're saying is coming from your own bias? And that this is your perspective based on your life experiences, your lived experiences are different from your client's lived experiences.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So before we close out the video, I want to ask if there's anything that we've missed, something that you want to add about this core competency.
So I want to touch upon what you asked me earlier about the supervision bit, right? So, and since that has become a part of the definition now, I think we need to focus a little bit more on that, because these are not things that you can be demonstrated in a coaching session or in a coaching engagement. So these are things that will come out in the exam, in some way. What is the kind of reflective practice that the coach is engaging in? How focused are they on their own personal work? What ways are they using to work on themselves so that they become aware of themselves, so that they become aware of their past, their context, their biases, so that they can catch them in the moment and not have to struggle over there. So that is where coaches have to, that's where you have to reach somewhere. I'm not saying you're going to get there, because then as a human being, that we are always going to be subject to biases. But how quickly can we become aware of them, and how quickly can we go beyond them, is the work we need to do on ourselves. And to what extent are coaches investing on themselves? Because I feel, that there is so much of focus on the client, and there is so much of focus on working in service of the client. I'm not sure how much focus is being given to, are we working in service of ourselves first? Yeah, it's like, to give a analogy, it's like you're in an aircraft and then there is air pressure is less, right? And then the mask falls down. And am I busy putting the mask on my neighbor before I put it on myself? So I have to build my own capacity. I have to build my own, do my own work, so that I can integrate who I am as a person with my professional practice as a coach. And I think that is something that is very important. And for that to happen outside a session, I think coaches should become open to receiving coaching supervision and or mentoring, so that they can focus on sharpening their competencies, and they can focus on resolving their issues, restoring their emotional balance, as well as developing themselves as a coach.
Awesome. Well, thank you for adding that part about coaching supervision and your life outside of the coaching session. So this has been a great video here. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for your work on the core competencies with the group that met in Paris. So thank you today for sharing with all the coaches, and thank you for watching if you're out there watching. And we've got more videos for you to watch. So if you're ready for number 3, you can head from India in this video over to Kenya with George up here for number 3. Or if you haven't watched number 1, you can start out the series from the beginning down here. And I look forward to seeing you in another video.